this is like a federal land grab in the Common Core system. I mean, is that accurate?
It's not only accurate, it's exactly what the plan is. If you really understand President Obama's pursuit of equity, the whole agenda of education affects so many more things than people really realize. It affects not only parents and grandparents and children, but it affects your taxes, your locally elected school board members, the property value of where you go to school, your zip code, for instance. So you have to ask the question, if Obama is going to create equity, how is he going to do that? How is he going to make everybody the same? So you have to think about that. So how do you make all kids the same? It's going to become a core. It's your cookie cutter agenda.
He's imposing federal control over everything. And do you know of a question comes to mind, if it's relevant, are there states that have rejected Common Core, or is this in every school district in the United States right now? Mostly because the money is dangled out there as the carrot, and here, I've got money for you, but you have to go by our standards.
Correct. 45 states have exactly accepted the memorandum of the copyright of Common Core, but the others have gone a different route. They were usually pilots in different research projects. But if your state is giving the ACT kindergarten through 12th grade, the ACT, the American College Testing Company, was given the grant to actually develop the Department of Labor testing for attitudes, values, beliefs, and dispositions. Okay, so yes, it's in all 50 states. It's just that it's a little bit more technical as far as which state did which in order to get to the same end result. Okay, but basically every state is actually doing it, yes. So, but the third thing that Obama had done too, besides the FERPA, was he had to put more teeth into the system. So in 2012, he and Secretary Duncan issued what they called ESA flexibility waivers. And ESA is the federal law, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, that was actually set up under the Johnson administration to help poor children read. Okay, so what they did then was they had to put teeth into the system to make sure every school was going to conform to Common Core. So then we had these flex waivers where all the states then applied for the waiver, which a waiver to federal law is illegal also. I mean, how do you create a waiver to federal law without going through the legislature? So anyway, so what we had to do was we had to find a way to force the teachers to change, and we had to change the curriculum in every school. So you had the new tests that came out that were creating this new quote unquote assessment, which was very artificial. This is very artificial. It has nothing to do with academics. It has to do with meeting specific standards that the Department of Labor had put in place. So what they would do then is identify schools for failing, or they would identify teachers for failing. Then you hear all over the country of all the teachers upset because they're being fired or they're being forced to do something that they didn't want to do. They're being evaluated on how their children's test. So if a whole class was failing the Common Core test, who are they going to target? They're going to target Mrs. Smith, who taught fourth grade traditional academics. So the whole agenda was to get rid of all of the teachers, traditional teachers who taught academics, because they had to move toward this new Common Core teaching. And then schools would be identified for failing. So you could be academically or financially bankrupt, okay, or you could be Common Core bankrupt. So however your school would be failing, The state would come in, they had the authority then to do takeovers, or they called it turnaround schools. So it would be state-initiated control of your local school for not meeting these Common Core standards. So this was a great big, I don't know, I guess it was a big controversy what you've heard, like in Arizona, where all of the senior kids had opted out of the test, and you had New York that was all over the place. As far as kids opting out of the test. This was the problem. But the whole criteria, the flex waivers, is that they could go in and fire all the teachers if they were not performing. They said that they were not being quote unquote effective. But there were two other things that happened under these flex waivers. The next thing they did was Title I, like I said, was for poor children to learn to read. So they had to redefine what Title I was in order to grab all kids, even if your children were millionaires. Okay?
Well, now let me ask a question. Didn't poor kids already go to the public school system and have a standard of reading in place before Title I?
Yes. No, not before Title I. Title I, since 1965, would take those poor kids and give them special reading, special books to try to get them to learn better. There were just tons of programs that they used. Title I was for poor children, but that has all changed. The redefinition is educationally deprived. So your child is educationally deprived if they do not meet Common Core. But how are we going to get every child in every school to come under that blanket? Well, what Obama did and Secretary Duncan was they lowered the poverty guidelines for free and reduced lunch. So you had to have 40% of free and reduced lunch for a whole entire school to come under that whole blanket. So when you erase that and say, well, we're not using those guidelines anymore, it can be zero, then the term school-wide comes into play. So your whole entire school now is Title I. So now Common Core activities, curriculum, teacher training would be forced to change to Common Core. So under this blanket, they mandated what they called the social, emotional, and behavioral standards, which will now be used in the classroom. So what that meant was we're full circle from when I filed my federal complaint, and they were brazen enough to say, we are going to test attitudes and values and change attitudes and values in the classroom, even though it's against federal law. Okay, there's still a federal law out there called the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, which they're trying to change, that says you cannot test attitudes and values of your children. Now,
so basically, the Obama administration has imposed by executive order, presidential fiat, certain standards where the federal government comes in and is the standard by which and the enforcer of this educational system. And I can't even go on with that. There's the actual question. So once again, and I'm asking you the same question in a different way, it's once again the federal government has now complete control over what your kids learn and whether or not a teacher can continue teaching certain things. And this is all federally run. It's all under the federal government, no longer the states. Correct?
Totally in public schools. Okay, so you have to realize the only authority they have at this time is public schools.
So it's basically Obamacare in the educational system.
Absolutely. Okay.
Right.
And this is really important to understand, okay, because what had happened in December, just this past December, the reauthorization of ESA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, was passed. We fought it for a whole year. But so they passed the reauthorization. So what does that mean? It means the ESA flexibility waiver is now law. So they passed the waivers into law in December. So what does that really mean to all of us out here who had been fighting Common Core and been fighting the psychological abuse in the classrooms? Well, the law actually states exactly what they're going to do. And of course, the bill is it's bigger than Obamacare. I mean, it's huge. It's unbelievable. It's over 1,000 pages long. It's very complicated. It goes into all sorts of new agendas, but they name the psychological techniques that we had been fighting this past year.
This is the point that I really wanted to hear about is when it comes to the psychological techniques in the classroom.
You're right. This is the new system of behavior modification. It's the psychological mental health agenda that they're using. This not only links to the Department of Labor, this is going to merge health, education, and labor.
Wow.
So these specific techniques are actually used and funded from special education. And that legislation is called IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So if your child is being monitored for their attitudes and behavior, then the teachers have to monitor what kind of behavior your children are doing or acting out in the classroom. So, and the specific techniques of the specific terms they're using is called RTI, Response to Intervention, PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention and Supports, MTSS, Multi-Tiered System of Support, School-Wide Tiered System of Support, EIS, Early Intervening Services, Universal Design for Learning. These are all of the new teaching techniques to change the attitudes, values, and dispositions of your children. They also refer to this as grit, G-R-I-T, grit. Your kids have to have grit in order to graduate. So they've used this marketing term that was established from, Angela Duckworth, a professor out of the University of Pennsylvania, that is doing all of this quote-unquote grit research, but it all flows back to the Pennsylvania test in the very beginning, the Pennsylvania EQA, which I filed my federal complaint because it's really the national test. So when you look at this, the specific things that are named in the legislation, if you could go to your state, Google response to intervention with your state or positive behavior intervention and supports, and you will find an unbelievable amount of information. The key to this is that special education behavior mod is being used to screen all of the children. And there are 3 tiers of interventions. First, you have it for everybody, then you have it for some, and then the kids who really act out or whatever, those are the kids who would be targeted for intensive. Now, none of this comes under an IEP, which is normally for a special education kid.
Right.
This is all done prior to that, so no parental permission supposedly is needed to implement this agenda.
Hey, I just want to